We've been through, I mean, think about what we've been through over the last 2 years. It's like watching an epic movie and things never lighten up, you know? I mean, it's just been doom and gloom and fear and hysteria and divisiveness and shame and stigmatization and neighbors turning on each other and families. I mean, it's all just been so negative. I don't remember how I came across one of the articles you wrote, but it had a word in it that stopped me in my tracks. And it's a word that I haven't seen in print for at least 2 years. And the word was optimism. And I just thought that was so interesting. You've written, I've now come to realize, pretty extensively about the COVID narrative and the broader sort of global political dimensions to that, if I can put it that way. And you've written pretty poignantly and sometimes unforgivingly about that and the pandemic of sheepness or following or lack of critical thinking or things like that. But what really caught my eye initially was this idea that if things are as bad as they might be, right, if there is some greater global political strategy at work and we're just sort of pawns in that larger game, and by the way, we don't really have any agency or any ability to control our lives or to, you know, to manipulate our fate in any way. You come along and you say that that's not reason to be as down or depressed or fatalistic as we might be. So can you tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, we should introduce you. So your name is Michael Driver. You are the CEO of an investment bank, Convex Capital from Manchester. So first of all, can you tell us, how did you come to write quite, I think, insightfully and sometimes poetically about what we've been through over the last 2 years?
Well, okay, thank you very much for having me. And thank you very much for your sacrifice and your stand, by the way. I don't know if everybody says that, but it should definitely be said. Much appreciated here. I was invited to write something by a friend of mine who was writing for what was the Conservative Woman as that and now is TCW. So I'd written stuff before, but it was mainly boring business stuff. And I did do a podcast in April 20 that has some notoriety because they re-released it about 6 months ago under the caption, "How did he know?" where I talked about the civil liberties implications of lockdown and where it could all lead. So I had some history of sort of calling some of these. Yeah, well, yeah, I suggest I've got some experience there, which I'm now going to disprove by talking to you. But so yes, I was asked to write something, and we started to write occasional articles, just on anything that we found. They kind of gave me free rein to write anything I felt was appropriate. So going back to sort of the optimism point and your point about the wider agenda, I think I really want to make a point there is that it's clear that the billionaire class do have an agenda. They have an agenda that's separate has no democratic mandate, and they apply their agenda through the various NGOs, which they are either ostensibly or surreptitiously in control of. So I don't think we need to go down too many rabbit holes to establish that fact. You know, Mr. Gates influences health policy on a global level. Mr. Schwab has openly stated that he has operatives in every government, and the WHO, their actions, particularly in Africa and so on, show there is a non-democratic influence in our society. That
makes their actions really non-conspiratorial because it's more open, I think, than people believe.
The conspiracy theory label fails in this. Once we look at what's publicly available information, there is no need for the conspiracy label. I do get a bit frustrated with people who go beyond that into the conjecture, because it's fine to have these conjectures. You don't need to. What is publicly available is sufficient to refute the billionaire class's agenda. I think the article you read was when I said the only sane response to Davos is optimism.
Yes.
And that was really going to the next level and thinking about how we evolve as a society, how progress is made. And the point that I was making was that the billionaire class they seek to control everything from the top down. The analogy is they're trying to ascertain the position of every molecule in the universe, and then by therefore doing that through their artificial intelligence or some such other nonsense that they talk about, that in some way they'll be able to control outcomes. And everybody's experience, I mean, we can talk about complexity theory, we can talk about Stuart Kauffman and what he says about living life forward into mystery. You know, the future isn't unpredictable because we don't have enough information. The future is unimaginable because it doesn't matter how much information you have, it will always surprise you. You can't infer Tinder from a silicon chip. You know, emergence, as Kaufman looks at it, is you can't infer the outcome from the constituent parts. And sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, because there's so much here to unpack. As a philosopher, I can't help but think about the millennia-old debate over determinism and free will. And this is a very interesting, I think, take on this geopolitical problem, which is that there's this underlying belief that the universe is deterministic in some way. And if it's deterministic, then it's possible to come to know all of its moving parts and understand the causes that link those moving parts. And then, if I understand you correctly, there's a moral failing there as well, because there's a kind of hubris or arrogance that comes on the part of some individuals thinking that they can know and then also possibly control some of those parts.
Well, I mean, Harari's a good example. You know, if Harari saw a pool of water on your tabletop, he would tell you the shape of the ice that made it. They have this incredibly overbearing, hubristic attitude, which I think the article that you read is, and point out that the inevitable failure of this is the, you know, globalism from the top down is there's a history, or, you know, a history is littered with the failure of this ideology, if you like.
How far back does that history go? I remember that claim in the article, and I wanted to ask you that. Is this something that we have always, I mean, has it always been the case that some individuals separate themselves from the group or the tribe and attempt this sort of top-down hierarchical control over others?
I think history is quite difficult at the moment, because we're seeing in real time how the victors paint history. So the history of the last 2 years is being painted by the people who are currently in charge. And if you come along in 50 years' time and you read it, you're going to be seeing a very different reality, I think. But I think almost the events more than the historical. I'm not a historian, so I don't want to get into too much depth there. But you can take Roman Empire onwards, I guess, and see the decline of all these empires, and it normally is around that hubristic element. It's as soon as people think they've got nature beat, nature normally turns round. And I think I use the Yiddish proverb, "Man plans and God laughs," but I quite like the Mike Tyson one, which, you know, everyone's got a plan till they get punched in the face. I think what I didn't really say in that article, but I kind of wish I had, sort of looking back, is everybody knows this. Everybody knows that life doesn't go according to plan, and they know it every minute of every day. It's something people instinctively are aware of. And the other thing is, nobody really wants it. And I read this amazing piece, and I can't find it anywhere. And I've tried to convince myself that I came up with this idea, but I'm pretty sure I didn't. And it's, imagine that we have a perfectly predictable world where there is never serendipity. So there's no serendipitous positive events. There's no serendipitous negative events. So your whole life is predictable, ordered, in the way that the billionaire class, as I refer to them, have it, that they're going to make the world via this transhumanism or whatever other such nonsense that they come out with. Now, if there was a red button, and that red button had random printed on it, and that red button was in every house, how quickly do you think everybody out there would be smacking that button?
Well, I'm not a psychologist. This question perplexes me deeply. I don't know if the root cause of compliance is a failure to be aware of what we're talking about today, or if there's an awareness or a gradual awakening to that kind of awareness, and there's a kind of malaise or moral reluctance or exhaustion to cope with it. And I do wonder frequently if that's just a result of the grandeur of our world, that we just think, I can barely manage my household and my cell phone and my, and now you want me to think about, that transhumanism. Now you want me to think about that, So
Well,
I don't know. I'm deeply.
Eric Fromm would say we don't even know we're complying.
Mm-hmm.
So he would say that
can you consent to comply?
yeah, people. So I think, somebody else you should probably get on is Ian McGilchrist, and Ian McGilchrist, the master in his emissary fame, and he talks about the right brain and the left brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a big subject to explain. How about you? Oh, we lost connection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So what he would say is that our way of attending to the world is being colonized by the left hemisphere, and he that would explain the inability of people to see in context. So they would see the atomized, literally the list of things that everything is atomized, and it's very difficult. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's very difficult for people to put things into context. So I think that sort of hemispherical explanation, he even says himself, even if it's a metaphor, that's okay, because metaphor is how we understand the world. Mm-hmm. But I highly recommend his book. But I think it's not that people are necessarily conforming; they don't realize they're conformist. I think that may be some explanation.
They believe they're making a free choice towards communal cooperation in a.
Well, I think Fromm's phrase is automaton conformity. Mm-hmm. So people don't know they're doing it. It's automatic.
Mm-hmm. And packaged beautifully. We're all in it together. Who wouldn't want that?
Well, my theory is really that we're in a hall of mirrors. So what the technological society that we live in is created via screen-based culture. It is effectively severed us from our instincts, from our intuition. So
yeah, let's dive into that a little bit, because I know, so let's go back to the idea that you have that the lockdowns have infringed on our civil liberties in certain ways. And I'd like to connect that to the point you're making now, that screen time, and we've had more of that over the last 2 years than ever before. How is that having an effect, or how is that sort of further entrenching the harms that the lockdowns are doing to our civil liberties, do you think?
Well, I think what screens do is intuition is like a reverberative process. So within, if you were face to face with somebody, you just pick up so much more of unspoken communication. Mm-hmm. Similarly, if you're in nature, you're picking up so much more information than you do. And the screen is a representation, so it's a rayifying progress. So I think what this screen-based culture does is cut you off from your natural instincts. And you can actually see that in a lot of people who've kind of gradually, Jordan Peterson, to use a Canadian example, is somebody who had the vaccine, but later it's like his instincts let him down at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then he later came to the conclusion that what was going on, he had to almost rationalize that. So he'd lost contact, if you like, with his intuition, his instincts. And I think what's particularly happened in the UK is that the working class, who are necessarily more in contact with their instincts and their intuitions than the middle class are, it was the working class that started saying no. And it's the working class that stopped the progress, perhaps why we didn't end up quite where you are. But if you're close, if you're a manual worker or blue collar worker, as you would put it, if you're closer to your survival line, if you're constantly having to think about tomorrow and how you get through tomorrow, you're much closer instinctually, perhaps, to your intuitive understanding of things than if you receive all your information via the media, be it the old media or social media, and you've abdicated almost your instinctual reactions. When I think much of the middle class have basically abdicated all responsibility to the billionaire class, which is, and I think that's how that kind of non-virtuous circle works.
That's interesting. It sounds a bit like the idea is that intuition is a defense mechanism, but you have to use it in order to keep that muscle, if you will, strong, and that not needing to work day to day for your survival gives you a sort of luxury that disables that intuition. And are we just an intuitionless culture? Do we just sort of move about? And if we are lacking intuition, what is it that motivates us then? Like, what is it that's the root of our decisions, or what generates our desires if it isn't a kind of intuition?
Well, firstly, I think we evolved instinct and humility to survive in an uncertain world. They're the two things that have kept us as a species, that have kept us going to now. And that's essentially living from inside to out. And I think what we now do is we live from out, or lots of people do, is they live from outside to in. So they wait to be told what to think. They wait to be told what they should be doing. Then they wait to be told, particularly, what their beliefs are. And I think that's the opposite to how we've got here as humanity. So I think that's the dynamic. So the second half of the question was the second half of the question.
I don't know, but this is so interesting to me, because as you're speaking, I'm thinking, I mean, so much of literature captures the opposite idea. You think getting far from the madding crowd, a room of one's own. I mean, even you think of someone like Emily Dickinson, who was an agoraphobic, and maybe she took it too far to the extreme and was handicapped by it in a certain sense. But we have not in the past ever, I don't think, privileged or prioritized our participation in the public space at the sacrifice of our private sphere, have we? And we've lost, like, if we don't have a room of one's own anymore, we can't, how can you kind of restabilize your mental life? How can you calm the chaos that comes from being out in the world every day?
Well, it's the removal of people's interior life. I think that's what social media, what constant screen exposure does. I think it takes away the interior life. Who reads anymore? Who's got the attention span to read anymore?
We scroll, we don't read.
But what we want everything in 2-second sound bites. Nobody wants to think deeply about anything, because it's kind of hard, and it's much harder when your attention span's been shortened via, the medium.
And it's humbling, because you might ask yourself a question that you don't know the answer to. You might ask yourself a few questions you don't know the answer to.
Well, not knowing is something that we used to be comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
Not knowing is being comfortable with not knowing is probably the reason why the human species is here today. And we're now reversing that, is that you have to know. We have to have the answers for everything. And I think that is very, very dangerous, because we can't have the answers to everything. And I think that's where the danger is with what the billionaire class are doing at the moment.
As a student of history, I think a lot about the tragedies, the classical tragedies. And I just can't help but wondering if, as a species, we have a kind of tragic flaw, and that we're in process towards making decisions that will propel us toward that end. And the way the tragedies always turn out is that there's some sort of climactic culmination of this tragic flaw that destroys the hero's life usually, and then a kind of self-awareness comes from working through those feelings in a sort of catharsis. But there's always a disaster, right, that leads to that kind of enlightenment or self-awareness. Do you think we're on that sort of course?
I think it's dangerous to be pessimistic, sort of going back to the optimism, because it can become fatalistic, becomes defeatism, like this sense that I think I mentioned that to me, the flaw in some of the opposition is the assumption that the WEF project is doable. Harari's project or Schwab's project. The assume that this isn't doable at all. And I'm very much of the view, the very optimistic view, and the fundamental optimistic view is actually Davos man. It's him that is essentially fighting the teleological arrow of the universe, and we are not. It's them that's got the impossible task. I mean, I think a universe that with beauty, with unfolding uniqueness, is already teleological. It already has a purpose, and the universe does not like to be organized. It does not like to be predicted. It does not like to be second guessed, and it's them that are fighting against this teleological purposeful arrow of the universe. It's a verb. It's not a noun. A verb with many adverbs. It's not a noun chasing nouns. That's the reality. So those of us that, if you like, I think I said surf the emergent reality, are actually in the flow of the universe. And what Davos man and WEF man is fighting, if you like, that rich unfolding of uniqueness, because what they're saying is that they can predict it, so therefore it won't be unique. Now, the universe isn't like that. So their whole thesis is against, if you like, the entire universe. So they're fighting the entire universe. And this is why they will lose. They will eventually lose. Now, the criticism I had when I've said that is what about the collateral damage? Which is a little bit like your point there, is does there need to be some catharsis, some inevitable fall? And I think that, we have the opportunity to learn from history. We have the opportunity to say, does it have to be like this? And it doesn't have to be like this. I think one of the most wonderful, I was actually in Tanzania earlier this year. One of the wonderful stories I heard of the pandemic was the way that the civil disobedience in Tanzania, where they tried to enforce the masks and the lockdowns, and people they didn't even say no, they just didn't do it. It's not even like they went through the process of refusal or the process of no, they just didn't. and I think that's just so powerful.
What's going on there? Can you do you know? Are you familiar enough with the culture? I mean,
I think I've said previously, the Green New Deal is neither new, green, or a deal. And the NGOs that operate in Africa seem to represent corporate interests at heart. And perhaps what we regard as conservation organizations are quite the opposite. So I think there's a very complicated scenario evolving with regard to, the wildlife parks, the Maasai. It's not simple, and it's not a black and white scenario, but there's a lot going on in Africa. I think William Easterly wrote a fantastic book, The Tyranny of Experts, where he looks into, the effect that those of us in the West have had, particularly Mr. Gates, and many arguments. I think in New York Times, before they became wholly colonized, he would have many arguments with the Gates Foundation and the top-down solutions that the Gates Foundation are trying to impose, in Africa particularly. So Tanzania, I think, is particularly complicated. They're trying to shift the Maasai further off their ancestral lands at the moment. So it is quite a complicated environment, but fair microcosm of what we're experiencing in the rest of the world, I would think.
Well, here in Canada, sometimes I feel like we've had life so good for so long that we have little reason to be skeptical. And skepticism doesn't always have to be negative and pessimistic. You can have a healthy kind of skepticism, right? And I think that healthy skepticism is just a kind of critical thinking. It's just having a rational filter such that when data or information enters your mind, you work on it a little bit. And you are able to, after a while, when that's developed and it becomes intuitive, we were talking about intuition earlier, you're able to sort of recognize something that if you hold it simultaneously with another belief in your mind, you get a contradiction. So we quickly, but I think we've lost that in Canada anyway, culturally, and probably largely due to our education system, broadly understood, have lost that ability to create a filter between what comes to our mind from the world and then the ideas that we generate as a result of it, because we frequently hear that, well, CBC said or CNN said, therefore it must be true, without the individual assenting to or refraining from assenting to that conclusion, right? And so it's very interesting to me that there are different levels of maybe healthy skepticism in different cultures throughout the world.
I think something else slightly is going on. So I think it's certain types of people that are skeptical. I think that perhaps always the majority, I think you would have chaos. I think a lot of it's about the width of the edge being just right. So I think I always qualify the word evolution because there's some bits in there that I'm not completely convinced about, but probably another topic. But from an evolutionary perspective, I think we've always had, and I call this group of people the mavericks because it makes us look cool. That's the main reason for calling them. But you've always had people who are just skeptical, and that is that I am. You know, my friends would say, if everyone walks that way, you just automatically, I accept that is true. So I think there is this, I used to think it was the entrepreneurial, and I still do maybe think that epigenetics has some part of it. It would almost make sense. So, but I think you have, and it needs to be not too, it's sort of that thing between totalitarianism and chaos. And I think if everybody thinks the same, you have totalitarianism, but everyone thinks like a maverick and you're just going to have chaos. So I think it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective for there to be a significant but small percentage of people who are inherently skeptical. Now, a good way to transmit that generation to generation would be via some sort of epigenetic phenomena. And I used to conjecture, and I perhaps do conjecture, that entrepreneurialism was a result of a highly stressful childhood. So I wonder if that might be the thing that triggers a percentage of people to be mavericks. So I think what's actually happened is they've just marginalized those people. So rather than it's a lot easier. I have a slight issue with Mr. Desmet on his mass formation psychosis. I think he's got something there. I think there's definitely something going on in there. But I think it does two things. I think it kind of minimizes the fact that most people are fairly conformist, and that's good, and some people aren't. And what they've managed to do is completely marginalize the some. I guess it's why you're having this conversation with me and not continuing to teach at university. They've unsuccessfully now, because you've got podcasts and great support, but they tried to marginalize you because you're a maverick.
Silence.
Yeah, and
you're out
I think
of the species, right? It's that.
What's we 6 companies own most of the media. 2 or 3 companies, maybe even one organization, without getting too controversial, is uncontrollable social media. So it's all politically influenced. So what they have managed to do is marginalize the maverick. So rather than persuade everybody to think a certain way, those people were likely to be. I don't like to use the word manipulatable because it sounds derogatory. There's nothing wrong with a conformity. We wouldn't have a society without that. But what they've done is they've turned that conformity to their advantage. But I think what they have done is to get rid of us, or to try and get rid of the likes of us. I think they've been very successful of taking our voice out of society.
We need a term like reflective conformity or something. I think the idea that you're aware of the fact that you are agreeing with others, but you're doing it in full awareness and for a reason. And you
think for a long time people did. I think for a long time people did that, and maybe that's the thing they've been cut off from the with the social media and with the screen-based culture. But the other thing I think the Desmet's theory, and I think is a real massive flaw, is looking at this mass psychosis. He misses the real problem, and the real problem is acquired psychopathy. So acquired psychopathy is what happens when you get too much money. And that's the real issue. It's almost blaming. He's almost blaming the population, whereas it is those that are doing the manipulating, the billionaire class, who, I'm not saying every billionaire is a psychopath, but acquired psychopathy is a much more interesting topic to me than Mr. Desmet's theory.
Well, I wonder, is that true just for the billionaires, or is that true of many of the rest of us as our incomes are increasing and our buying power and our credit and are we getting a kind of
no. I mean, this is from personal experience. So I come into contact with very wealthy humans, and I'm not saying they're all psychopaths, so I'll never be able to deal with them. But the good thing about being able to say something like this is anyone I know will just think he's not referring to me, so it'll be fine. But I think most people who come into contact with very rich people, there's an amount of money that takes you beyond morality, beyond any moral comfort.
Superhuman level of money.
Yeah. I mean, have you noticed that how superheroes suddenly became billionaires? What did he say in Batman? What's your superpower? I'm rich. So I think that the debate is missing the most important constituent, which is what is drive. Don't worry so much about what's driving the population. They've not done anything wrong. I don't hold people responsible. I hold the people who attempt to force mandates, whatever the mandate. I have a big issue with those people, but people who made their decisions and they took their decisions which were different to ours. That's absolutely fine. We shouldn't be worrying too much about those people. We should be worrying about, it's not many people. We should be worrying about the billionaire class who have an agenda that is different to ours. And you don't need to be a conspiracy theorist to see this. It is clear. They tell us what it is.
So what do we do about this? You know, if I listen to you and I believe you and I think, all right, well, I'm not going to let this close guy control my life anymore. I don't think I can just call him up. I guess I could have gone to I could have gone and asked him a question in person, but that's not what you're talking about, is it? We need a kind of an awareness.
I think we need the worst, but I think we need an alternative solution. You know, the true battle of our times isn't left be right. We're kind of baited into these visions. We're being divided all over the place. The recent Supreme Court rulings included, and what the real battle is between command and control technocrats on the one side and adapt to survive emergence on the other. And the problem is the command and control technocrats control all of the media and therefore all of the debate. So what we're not doing is we're not presenting, or there's not enough of us presenting ground up solutions to as an alternative to their centralization. So they pursue this centralization fallacy that somehow that they can control the position of every molecule in the universe, as I said before. And what we should be deriding it. We should be deriding it because everyone's experience says it doesn't work.
There has been so much talk about fear over the last 2 years and how crippling it is for thinking clearly and for operating as a good moral person. And I'm thinking about your concept of optimism, and optimism requires a certain amount and maybe kind of confidence, doesn't it? But fear and confidence are maybe corollaries of one another. You need to build up confidence in other things beyond yourself, but maybe most importantly, self-confidence in order to manage that fear. So can you speak a little bit to that point? I mean, how do we, is optimism deeply connected to confidence? And if we have a crisis of confidence, how do we start feeling optimistic about the future? How do we build that optimism muscle again that we seem to have lost?
Well, I'm not sure that I think fear and confidence are often the same thing. So I actually think courageous people are the people who are more afraid. So what precipitates action? As a serial entrepreneur, and without going into that in any depth, what's mainly driven me, it is fear of failure, and I think they're much more closely related than opposite. So I think you can use be aware. Perhaps people haven't been afraid enough, or perhaps they've been afraid of the wrong things. But there's a great line, I think, with it. What's the starting point? So I was trying to think. You were so kind to say I write poetically, and I am quite the student. So there's a great Canadian, I think he was born in Canada, Mark Strand, and he's a line from his I think it's called The Next Time, and he says the lovely line is that if we knew how long the ruins would last, we would never complain. And essentially he's saying that this is it. This is the moment that we have as humans. What's the alternative? But there is no alternative to optimism. The ruins of our lives will last for an eternity after we're gone. This is it.
It is beautiful. I wasn't kidding when I said that you're poetic. I mean, it's the failure to be optimistic is to fail to be human, isn't it? And it leads to a kind of defeatism. And if you lose your optimism, if you lose your hope, if I'm allowed to unite those two ideas, although we might have to have a chat about whether optimism and hope are the same thing, but if you lose your positive feelings about the future, your ability to look towards the future, then you've really lost what it is to be human, because you've lost your confidence in your ability to affect change in the world. You've lost the gravity of the footprint of your life. We have such a crisis, well, in the UK as well. I mean, we have a children's mental health crisis here in Canada and in the States, and I know the NHS declared a crisis a while ago. And about a year ago, I was talking to a university student, and she said that basically no one under 40 thinks that anything good will ever happen again. I mean, talk about the death of optimism. It's on the extinction list, I think.
I think one of the things that we talk about as, it sounds a bit nefarious, doesn't it? But I'm very clear, it's a class of people with an agenda that isn't democratically mandated, that is as different to what the majority of people want. And I think one of the things they're trying to do is to divide the species. And I think that and this is probably quite a radical view, I think they are taking their cue from history, but I don't think it's from 1939. I think the cue they're taking is from 55,000 years ago, when the Neanderthals disappeared. So I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to divide us between the analog and the digital, which I think is a great phrase for thinking about the different ways in which it's from a guy called Gerald Ashley. Hi, Gerald, good friend of mine. And it's the way that we attend to the world, either digitally or analog. And Nick Hudson may have said, his theory of how we accumulate knowledge by a cultural evolution, and sometimes the culture moves too fast for us to keep up with. And I think what the billionaire, what the Harari WEF class want to do is to have this digital interface that unless you become this transhuman abomination that they want, that in somehow you will fail at that cultural hurdle, that evolutionary hurdle, if you like. And I think that's the way they're seeking to divide us. And I think in the digital world, and the only way they can make this wholly predictable environment is to close the system. So in an open system, you have unpredictability, you have Knightian uncertainty, you have this wonderful unfolding uniqueness. Whereas in a closed system, you only have what the system gives you, and the system is programmable in order to become predictable. And in there is no cause for either hope or optimism in that digital world, because it doesn't apply to anything. And what they're both referring to is the unique ability within our universe to produce beauty. It just keeps coming. They can't stop it. It's like when you're walking along in a concrete pavement sidewalk, and a beautiful flower has just poked up between the stones. And no matter how hard they try, they can't stop it from coming. This is one other reason why they're going to lose. This is the nature of reality. You don't require a particularly religious bent to know this. We all know it. We all know it when we pull the curtains back in the morning, or we watch a sunset every night. The universe has a purpose, and you don't need to be. You see it all around you. You don't need to be religious to know this. And that part of that purpose is the unfolding uniqueness, the rich unfolding uniqueness that is presented to us. And they can't stop that. But the only way can make it look like they've stopped it is by closing the system. This idea that, chess doesn't contain life, but life contains chess. So they want to play chess on a chessboard. The problem is, of course, is that, I think it was the famous phrase, wasn't it, is the pigeon sometimes lands on the chessboard.
Mm. Is there any meaning to be found in this digital existence, do you think? I imagine some people who, were quite willing to get on board with the vaccine passports and will be quite willing to get on board with automated bank, any form of sort of connecting all the various parts of ourselves digitally, might say, well, this sounds pretty great. It sounds like it's going to make my life easier. I can just tap whenever I need something. I can show up at the airport and they can probably scan me to see if I have it sounds just a lot easier. I can detect illness early on, and then they're going to fix it more likely. And I will be healthier and I will live longer, and I can travel without obstacle, and I can somehow learn more because they'll just put ideas into the chip that's in my brain. All of this sounds great. What would you say to the person who is feeling quite positive about that digital sort of existence?
3 words. Has it yet? Has it made your life easier yet? I think you struggle to find somebody who feels like they work less because they're connected digitally.
Yeah.
Most people work an awful lot more. And even if they stop working, they're still connected to work. So what I think the digital connection has done has given employers the opportunity to be in constant touch with the workforce, constant. So who switches off? So the any sense that their life is it's inconvenience. And there's the wonderful William Merwin poem called Convenience, and he says that we'd sacrifice our lives for it, for convenience, and that seems to be what the bargain is. We'll start wars for convenience. How much are we prepared to give for convenience? And I think that it's I love this other phrase, other Merwin phrase. I think about it a lot. It's reading by lightning. So there's no context. So you're in the dark, lightning bolt, you read a tiny bit of what's in front of you, and then it goes dark again. And I think that's the way we're living our lives to some greater or lesser degree at the moment, is it's shorn of context. What is the context of the convenience that this digital world gives you? The context is you're never alone. You never use your imagination. You never turn off. You're never not on call or beholden to something or somebody. What are you prepared to exchange for your convenience? You're exchanging your entire life for this digital convenience. So I think it's that, go back to this phrase, it might seem convenient if you're reading by lightning. But once you get out into the daylight, the context becomes much more apparent. And there is absolutely no evidence. In fact, the evidence is absolutely the contrary, and you referred it to before, is that people are getting any happier.
Mm-hmm.
People aren't any happier because they're connected digitally. People are very unhappy. And yet it's very,
why?
Do they not know why?
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
It's very interesting, isn't it? People who are our age or older or a bit younger are encountering this after having lived another way, in a more analog way. But I wonder what life will be like in 100 years or in 40 years or even 10 years, when you will have 10-year-olds who possibly were formed, their character was, their minds, the synapses in their brain were formed in this digital world to the degree that we have it now. And you were speaking about mavericks before, people like us who are quite happy to step outside of what we see as a kind of unreflectiveness. And but can you have, will you be likely to have mavericks, or as many of them, or of the same kind, or with the same kind of passion or force, in a world that creates minds in a certain way from the very beginning, that's more along that digital track than the analog track?
Well, there's obviously an inbuilt assumption in the question is that the digital track is going to continue. Mm-hmm. I suspect not. And the digital track is still a minority of human beings on this planet. Mm-hmm. So it's probably only 1 out of the 7 billion of us that are here that are connected in that way. And we tend to only see that world. There's an awful lot of people on the planet who aren't connected in that way. So I think it's probably two-pronged answer question. If everybody was plugged into in digitally, I suspect that nature would find a way of upsetting that apple cart. So I'm not. I don't think necessarily, but if it was possible, then I do believe that everybody would become automaton in the manner that you've described. But I don't think the world is like that. I don't think the world's going to end up like that. And also, I think people instinctively, even the people who are much younger than us, instinctively somewhere know that this isn't. I think everybody knows that something isn't right at the moment. Mm. So where does that? I'm more interested in where that goes. This niggling sense. Speak to anybody, ask anybody, feel that something's wrong. Almost everybody will say, I'm more interested in where that goes. I think it's much more likely that becomes the prevalent mindset than this sort of digital mindset becomes.
So you think originality will overtake compliance eventually if we pay attention to that pang of conscience, whatever that is in the gut that's sort of nagging us.
So Thoreau said, in wildness is the preservation of the world. And he doesn't just mean the wild out there. When we think about, we think about the wilderness, for instance, he was sat in his cabin by the pond or whatever. He means the wildness in us. The thing that you haven't got control of, the thing that is outside of your reach. And it's in everybody. The preservation of the world is in everybody, because everything is unexpected and wild. And I think that
can be far more savage than we ever realized.
Well, wild doesn't necessarily mean bad. It means free in some ways. So it's that part of us that we just can't control. It's that part of us that's just out of reach. And I think that is the part of us that's calling. When you say to people there's something wrong, it's the wildness. It's the attempt. There's a fantastic, see if I can get this right, there's a fantastic aphorism with the book's called Voices by Antonio Porcia. And he said, that which cannot be domesticated in a man is not his evil, but his goodness. So I think Hannah Arendt had something to say about that, didn't she? In the banality of evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's evil that is domesticated, and it's good that is wild. And in that wildness is the preservation of the world, and that is in every human being. So I think that they are, trying to separate us from all of those senses, intuitions, and I think they're going to fail. Now, the question I always get asked when I launch this 3-beer conversation is, but what about the collateral damage? And that does worry me. The purpose of maybe this conversation and one or two of the things I've written is to really talk about the opportunities that we have to present the alternative case, based on the fact that it's us that are going in the direction the universe goes, and it's the other side that's fighting the universe.
I think it isn't a coincidence that we have accompanied this kind of sort of technologically obsessed culture with a sort of lack of attention to the liberal arts more broadly understood. I think a lot of people don't know that the liberal arts used to include what we consider to be scientific disciplines now. And so there was mathematics and astronomy, but alongside that, there are things like poetry and literature and art. And those are the things that help us to, it might be the case that technology, which comes from the Greek techne for tool, or it might be the case that technology is a wonderful tool for humans once we understand which goals are noble. And once we understand how to frame that tool in a way that serves us and not the other way around. And our loss of the broad sense of the liberal arts, which is the arts that were appropriate for a free person as opposed to an enslaved person, is that you understand that full range of disciplines that a human is capable of engaging in. And I think you tell me what you think, but I think we're seeing a kind of hubristic focus on what science and technology can do for us, because we have forgotten the ways that it needs to be packaged and understood to make our humanity the kind of actualized potential that it can be.
I think what it does is it takes away context. So that's what technology does. Technology is, by its very nature, focused on a particular outcome, and that outcome doesn't encompass. And I think one of the major faults with the lockdown advocate community was they failed to see the second order effects of lockdown. Some of the things that you've been talking about, the civil liberties, the mental health, so on and so forth. Aside from whether lockdown works or not, and it's clear it's probably detrimental. Aside from that, what are the second order effects of these policies? And I think what this scientific mindset, if you like, this left hemispherical mindset does is it fails to look at the second order effects of anything that you do. And what it then leads to is this constant drive to do something. Like the only way to solve a problem is to attack it one-dimensionally. And I absolutely do agree that the failure is to see things conceptually, and therefore to see second, third, fourth, fifth order effects of policy. And I think that is one of the biggest problems that we face on the other side, on the sort of lockdown advocate side, is they didn't compute any of it. There was no cost benefit analysis.
Michael, I don't know how many interviews I've done, how many interviews where I've interviewed someone I've done over the last 9 or 10 months, but in none of them have we talked so much about positive things and optimism and why we should reframe our thinking, not to be so pessimistic. And I greatly appreciate that. Can you? Well,
I am with compliments.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. I think we need to change the narrative. We need to change the words that we use and the way we think about things and how to move forward. Because if we don't, we're just going to be, we're going to be at a kind of not just political stalemate, but a civic stalemate. We're not, I can't tell you how many relationships, I don't know what it's like where you are, but how many relationships are just broken and stagnant, or strained and stagnant. And we need, I think we're at a point where, I mean, yes, I know there is some sort of a waking up among people, but it's not going to be the case that in the next week or month we have people radically changing their views about what has gone on over the last 2 years, and we have to move forward despite that. And you know, I think a lot about moral repair and how we acknowledge the brokenness that's happened between people in societies. But we can't just look backward. I mean, history is wonderful. It's the best teacher we have, I think, but we can't just get stuck there. We also have to think about how we use that information to move forward and look to the future. And it's very useful and very human, I think, to frame our current circumstances in the terms that you've given us. And I'm wondering, can we leave off by you telling people where they can find your writing and the things that you find to be interesting these days?
So I write for Kathy at TCW. So I used to be called the Conservative Woman. So if you put Michael Driver, author of Conservative Woman, in the search, you'll find most of the stuff that I've talked about today. I think in the articles I've written for Kathy, bravest woman in Britain as well. She's been suspended, blocked, defunded, you know, demonetized by just about everybody.
Well, that's a good sign. You know, she's likely to be interesting then.
What am I interested in at the moment? I mean, I'm a total geek, so you know, what am I reading at the moment? I read the latest Murakami. So I don't know. I'm interested in. It's really hard.
What are you writing right now? What's your next article?
I'm not writing anything at the moment. It's too embarrassing to say what I actually am writing at the moment. So
well, we'll have to check back with you.
We'll save that if I ever finish. But yes, we'll see. Yeah.
Michael, thank you so much for your generosity of time and for sharing your ideas, which is always the greatest gift we can give another person. So thank you so much.
And thank you so much for doing this. We should all be in your gratitude. This is what we need to do.
Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed watching this video, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to the democracyfund.ca/donate.